If you are an Indian gamer or a tech enthusiast interested in building PCs or PC hardware in general, then this video is for you. You see, recently I've decided to build myself a gaming system. And in this video, I'm not only going to discuss my choice of components and why I've selected these components for my build, I'm also going to be assembling all the components to build the system itself. But before I do that, I would like to talk a little bit about the various options that's available here in India to purchase PC hardware from. Of course, the most obvious option, and in my opinion, the best option would be to walk straight to a PC hardware retailer, select the component of your choice, maybe even haggle a bit for the price and walk away with the part. However, big retailers that keep stock of all the latest generation hardware are usually limited to big cities. So for someone like me who doesn't come from a very big city, availability of current generation PC hardware can sometimes become a bit of an issue, especially from our local retailers. So when I decided to build myself a gaming system using components that are within the latest couple of generations, the only option that was available to me is to look for online. Now, thankfully here in India, there are quite a good number of online options that are available to purchase, PC hardware from. Now, many of you may be thinking that the obvious place to look for would be Amazon and Flipkart. Now, of course, these two websites are the biggest online retailers here in India. But when it comes to purchase of PC components, they usually don't enjoy the number one recommendation from the Indian PC building and gaming community. Now, many users will give various reasons for that. But from what I have seen, usually the PC components that are being sold by Flipkart or Amazon, especially the more expensive ones like processors, motherboards, and graphic cards, are usually sold at a much higher price than what the average market price for those products are. Also, sometimes I felt that the variety in options that are being offered by these websites for a particular model can sometimes be a little bit limited. Now, of course, these are my personal opinion, but if you really want to purchase some PC components from either Amazon or Flipkart, make sure to research the seller first. Also ensure that the product that you are purchasing is either fulfilled by Amazon or has that app assured tag in case you are purchasing from Flipkart. But I would highly recommend that you at least check out the other options that I'm going to talk about before choosing your final shopping destination. So what are the other options? Remember the big retailers from big cities that I was talking about earlier? Well, with the growth in e-commerce here in India, many of these retailers have actually developed websites of their own and have gone online. Through their websites, they're selling their products all over India. Websites like elitehubs.com, MD Computers, Vishal Peripherals, Vedant Computers, computerstore.in, Prime AVGB, PCstudio.in. These are some of the major offline/online retailers here in India, and they can really offer a good variety of inventory to choose from. All you need to do is visit their website, browse through their stock, and have your preferred component delivered at your doorstep. And these websites are usually the most recommended when it comes to purchasing PC components online here in India. In fact, for my build, almost all the components that I've selected have been purchased from these websites, and my experience has been quite satisfactory. So there you have it. These are all the options that are available here in India to purchase PC components from. So finally, let's talk about my build. While choosing components for my build, the first decision that I had to take is to decide on the platform on which the system will be built. Now for my build, I've decided to go with AMD's latest AM5 platform, which supports the Ryzen 7000, 8000, and 9000 series of processors. Now, the reason for choosing this particular platform is the longevity that it offers. Because on the Intel side of things, the latest available platform is the LD1851 socket, which supports the Core Ultra lineup of processors. And Intel has already decided not to continue with that particular platform, and that the upcoming generation of processors will be using a newer socket and will be based on a newer platform. Whereas AMD, on the other hand, has committed to continue support for the AM5 platform till at least 2027, which means that at least another generation of Ryzen processors will be using the AM5 platform. And that makes the AM5 platform an excellent choice for PC builders, because as an AM5 user, I will have the option to upgrade my processor in the future without having to invest in a newer platform. Now, having selected the platform for our build, the processor that I've chosen is AMD's Ryzen 7 7700. This is an 8-core 16-thread processor, has a 65W TDP, and can boost up to 5.3 GHz. The reason for going with an 8-core processor instead of a 6-core one is that I will also be performing some productivity workload along with gaming on my system. Now, I paid around 27,800 rupees for this, and I purchased this from elitehubs.com. One cool thing about this is that it comes with a box cooler. Let me show that to you. This is AMD's Ray Prism CPU cooler, and it is quite a decent CPU cooler actually. So much so that I have decided not to invest in any aftermarket cooler, and I'm going to be using this one in my build for now. I'll also be making a dedicated video where I'll be testing the performance of this cooler under various different scenarios of CPU loading and see if I really need an aftermarket cooler or this one is sufficient for my use case. And if you're interested in something like that, please subscribe the channel and hit the notification bell so that you can get an update once the video is available. Now moving on from processors to motherboards. Now before we choose our motherboard, we must first decide which chipset we are going to be using. Now there are actually 9 different options of chipsets that are available for an AM5 platform. And without getting into all the details and specifications of each chipsets, I would like to show you the board that I have decided to put in my build. Now this is the Gigabyte B650 Gaming XAX V2. Now this actually uses the B650 chipset. And in my opinion, the B650 and the B850 chipsets are more than sufficient for almost all use cases. And you really don't need to invest in a more expensive chipset unless you're using your build for some talk and productivity purposes. Now this is a full-size ATX motherboard and it has got 3 M.2 slots. One of them is Zen 5. It has got Wi-Fi 6E support and it has got plenty of USB ports, at least as far as my use case is concerned. And from the VRMs, this uses an 8+2+2 configuration. Now the 8 phases of VRM that it has to power the processor actually has 60 amps of power stages each. That makes the VRMs of this board strong enough to handle all AM5 platform CPUs that are available in the market today. Now let's just get this out of the box and show you the board itself.
Now, before I forget, I also purchased this from elitehouse.com and I paid a little bit over rupees 15,100 for the board, which in my opinion is quite a good deal considering this board usually goes for more than 16,000 rupees. Now, building any system typically starts with the motherboard, and that's what I'll be doing as well. It is also a great idea to use the motherboard's box to use as a base while we are installing components on the board. Let's get the board out of the anti-static bag first. I really like the blackish look of the board. And I know that the first thing that you notice is that the processor is already installed. And the reason for that is that I've already performed an open-air test run of the system when I received the processor, RAM, motherboard and the power supply, just in case any component turns out DOA and I don't want to miss my return window. Thankfully that was not the case. I'm also not very comfortable taking out and reinstalling the processor because the socket and the pins are really sensitive, and I have seen many people who have ended up with bent pins but doesn't even realize what went wrong. But I do have a clip of when I installed the processor on the board, so let's check that out first. While taking the processor out of the casing, make sure you avoid touching the pads on the base of the processor. These are the pads, and you should hold the processor by its edge like this, or the IHS cover like this. Now let's install the CPU in the socket. To reveal the AM5 socket pins, just release the lever and lift the socket cover. There are the pins on the AM5 socket. Now place the CPU gently on the socket and make sure the small semi-cylindrical notches on the CPU's edges aligns with the extruded portion on the socket border. Also ensure that the processor is correctly oriented, for which you need to align the triangle on the top left corner of the CPU to that of the socket. Those are the triangles. I hope you can see that. Now as the CPU rests comfortably in the socket, it's time to press the lever down and pop goes the cover. And the CPU is installed. It's a fairly simple process. Now let's get back to the future. Now once the CPU is installed, it's time to connect the CPU cooler. Before I do that, I will have to apply some thermal paste on the processor. I will be using the Gelid GC Extreme Thermal Paste, which I purchased from Amazon for around 650 rupees. Let's get it out of the packet first. It's a 3.5 gram tube which I believe is enough for 4 to 5 repastes. Now there are actually various school of thoughts on how to apply thermal paste. I usually apply a pea-sized drop at the center of the processor with 4 small dots at the 4 corners. There are the 4 dots. And thankfully, I didn't make too much of a mess with this. Now the red prism cooler connects to the motherboard using 2 clips which attaches to the fan mounting bracket of the M5 socket. The clip with the lever will be on the top end of the motherboard. But first, I will connect this clip with the mounting bracket on the motherboard. It seems I will really need to tilt the cooler quite a bit to attach this clip to the mount. And once it's attached, I will straighten the cooler and proceed to attach the other clip. The second clip may sometimes, find it a little bit hard to reach the hook on the bracket, and it may require some adjustments, before it connects. I may need to, move the lever a little bit to get the clip in place. There you go. Well, now as the second clip is in place, we'll move on to engage the lever. Now it requires a decent amount of force actually, and the cooler is locked firmly in its place. Now as for the connector cable, it will go on to connect with the motherboard CPU fan header right there. And just like that, our cooler is installed. Now moving on to the RAM. The RAM kit that I purchased is the G-Skill Flare X5. This has 2 sticks of 16 gigs each, totaling 32 gigs, 6000 megatransfers and CL30. These specs are quite straightforward for AM5 builds nowadays. 32 gigs of 6000 megatransfers is the sweet spot for AM5. Also make sure that the kit comes with AMD Expo support. Although XMP RAMs will work on AM5 motherboards, but it is recommended to get a RAM kit that has got Expo support. Also make sure that you are using 2 sticks of 16 gigs each and not a single 32 GB stick, so that you can make use of dual channel mode. The prices of CL30 RAMs have been quite affordable lately. I purchased this kit from Vishal Peripherals for 9,900. Let's get the RAMs out of the packaging and install them on the motherboard. If you have 4 RAM channels on your motherboard, you may need to consult your motherboard manual to get an idea for which 2 slots to populate to make sure the RAMs are using dual channel. Now installing RAM is pretty simple. Well, let's first get the board at the center. There. Now as I was saying, installing is pretty simple. Just align the notch, this one, with the alignment key on the socket. Let me see if I can get it to focus. There is the alignment key. Just press the RAM to the socket till the locks at the end of the socket closes. You may hear a click sound as the lock closes, indicating successful installation. There you go. Now for me, the socket A2 and B2 of my motherboard needed to be populated for dual channel. I will just repeat the earlier steps with the other stick and we are done with our RAM installation. As for the SSD, I got the 1TB WD Black SN770. I actually purchased this last year from Flipkart for around 5,800 rupees. Now I have been using this in my laptop, but now I will be shifting it to this build. This is a Gen 4 SSD which I believe is more than sufficient for my use case. Now this has a max read speed of about 5100 megabytes per second and a max write speed of about 4900 Mbps. I'll be installing it in the Gen 5 slot of the motherboard to utilize the SSD to its full potential. To install the SSD, we first need to remove the heatsink from the M.2 slot. Just unscrew the heatsink. We will also remove this screw. Now this is the screw that will be holding the SSD in its place after it is installed. To install the drive, just align it with the PCI lane of the M.2 slot and give it a gentle push. Now screw the drive and it is technically installed. Now do not forget to remove the plastic from the thermal pad before applying the heatsink. Screw the heatsink and it's done. Now this is about time we put the setup into the cabinet. So let's first discuss the cabinet that I'll be using for this build.
Well, as for the case, I didn't want to spend too much on it, and I wanted something that gets the job done but remaining within the budget segment. So this is the MSI 120A Airflow, and this is one of the most popular options in the budget segment. It cost me around 3,650 rupees, and I got this from elitehubs.com. One of the reasons why this is so popular is because it comes with 6 pre-installed ARGB 120mm fan, which is sufficient for our use case. It also has plenty of room for airflow. It has got a maximum GPU clearance of 330mm, and it has got two USB 3.1 Type A ports for the front panel. So that's it for the case. Let's get our motherboard inside the system.
Before installing the motherboard in the case, first I will have to make sure that all the standoff screws are properly in place at positions where the motherboard will be screwed. Since mine is a full-size ATX motherboard, there should be 9 standoffs installed. Once the standoffs are in position, it's time to bring in the motherboard. It seems I'll be needing to remove this fan for better freedom of movement inside the case. It can be done with the fan in place as well, but since there is no harm in removing it, so why not? Let's unscrew it. Alright, it seems I'll need to remove the back panel as well to properly get the fan out of the way. There you go. Let's get the fan out of the way and bring the board back in. While installing the motherboard, I need to align the I/O shield of the board with the opening on the back side of the case like this. This is a good time to check if all the screw holes on the motherboard perfectly aligns with the standoffs. Once that's checked, let's tighten all the screws. Once all the screws are tightened, make sure that the board is sitting firmly in the case and there is no wobble or movement. Let's reinstall the fan. And the motherboard is installed. Here is a look of the case with the board in it installed. With the motherboard installed, there are 2 more components left to be installed in the system. But before I go ahead with that, I would like to introduce and unbox those components first.
Now, before continuing with our build, I would like to talk a little bit about the final 2 components that needs to be installed to complete our setup. And one of them is the most expensive component of the build, which is the graphic card. Now, I'm building my system primarily for 1440p gaming, and I wanted a GPU that has got at least 16 gigs of VRAM. Now, I know that most games today does not actually require more than 12 gigs of VRAM, even for native 1440p gaming, although some games are actually creeping dangerously close to that number. And as developers trying to make their games look more realistic with the use of high resolution, more detailed textures, and sometimes even mandatorily using ray tracing, this VRAM requirement is only going to increase with time. Now, today it is safe to assume that games that will be coming out in 2 to 3 years of time will actually require more than 12 gigs of VRAM. Also in 2025, if I'm investing in a GPU that costs more than 50,000 rupees, I'm getting one that has got at least 16 gigs of VRAM. Now, initially, the budget that I had allocated for my GPU was around 57 to 58,000 rupees. But witnessing the crazy GPU pricing of this generation, I actually had to stretch it a little bit to get the GPU that I really wanted for my system. So, the GPU that I decided to put in my build is AMD's Radeon RX 9070. And this one is the Gigabyte's gaming OC version. This is based on AMD's latest RDNA core architecture and has got all the latest features that are offered by AMD. Now, this card is usually overshadowed by its big brother, the 9070 XT, which of course is an excellent card by itself. However, the cheapest 9070 XT that is available in India usually goes for more than 70,000 rupees. Whereas I purchased this one for around 62,000 rupees from computexstore.in. Now, this one costs 8,000 rupees less than the cheapest 9070 XT while offering 10% less performance. And I'm absolutely fine with that. So let's take a look at what's inside the box.
Gigabyte has slightly factory overclocked this model. This can boost up to around 2700 MHz in stock settings, which is a little bit more than the base 9070, which I believe can boost up to around 2500 MHz. Okay, let's open the box. Looks like we have a quick guide manual, which can be handy sometimes, and the GPU itself. Let's get the card out of the box. There is nothing else in the box, so let's put it aside. Peel these stickers first and get the card out of the bag. There it is. It's a triple fan dual slot design. This is really a good looking GPU. Of course, having spent 62,000 rupees, this may seem like an obvious thing to say, but honestly I really like the looks. Some sparkling textures going on. It has got 2 HDMI and 2 display ports. This part can be moved. It reveals or covers the RGB lighting. As per your preference, you can use it. This card also comes with dual BIOS. There you can see the performance and silent BIOS modes. It can be very handy, if one of the BIOS gets corrupted for some reason, and you can always switch into the other BIOS and able to boot into the operating system for troubleshooting. Performance BIOS is set by default. That switch can be used to switch between the BIOS modes. So this is the Gigabyte RX 9070 gaming OC. Now let's talk about the PSU next, and we will install both of these in our build.
Well, as for the PSU, based on all the components that I have selected for our build so far, a recommended wattage for the PSU will be 750 watts. And there are a lot of websites that will calculate this for you. You just need to select all the components that you have decided to put in your build, and the web page will calculate the recommended wattage for your PSU. This value can also be obtained from your GPU's product page on the manufacturer's website. Now, as for our build, although a 750 watt PSU would have been sufficient, I decided to go with an 850 one. The reason being, I wanted to have a little bit of headroom available just in case I decide to upgrade my processor or GPU in the future to a little bit more powerful one. Now, the PSU that I actually decided to purchase for my build is the Gainstorm PN850M. Now, this is a fully modular unit and it is also ATX 3.1 compliant. It cost me 7,990 rupees and I purchased this from pcstudio.in. Now, it is also absolutely crucial for the safety of your build and the components that you invest in a PSU that has got sufficiently good build quality. Now, for that, you can consult the SPL's PSU tiers list. They've actually ranked all the PSUs that are available in the market today based on their performance and build quality. And in that particular list, this PSU is rated as a tier B unit, which is actually the second highest ranking. And that is actually sufficient for a build such as ours.
For those of you who don't know, Gamerstorm is a sub-brand of Deepcool, and this PSU is also sold as Deepcool's PN850M, and both of these units are exactly the same. The only difference is in their logos. Now, as you can see, we have received all the cables separately, as this is a fully modular unit, and I will only be using the ones that I need. We have also received some zip ties for tidying up after the build is complete. That's the PSU. Love the minimalistic cyan colored highlights. Alright, let's take a look at the connecting ports. Now, this is a ATX 3.1 unit. So we have got a 600 watt port for the somewhat controversial 12 volt high power connector, which is usually used by NVIDIA's 40 and 50 series GPUs. Before putting the PSU in the case, all the required cables must be connected on the PSU side of the connection. This is the 24-pin motherboard power connector, which is actually split into two parts at the PSU end of things. Let's plug them in first. There you go. Now the PCI marked cables are for powering the GPU. I'll be needing two of these as my GPU uses two 8-pin power connector. Now the CPU power port on my motherboard uses an 8 plus 4 pin connection. Since there is no 4 pin separately, I'll be needing two 8-pin CPU connection. I'll also have to plug in the SATA cable for powering the fan hub of the case. Now we have all our required cables connected in the PSU. Let's go and install the GPU. Now, before installing the GPU, I'll first have to lift this bracket that prevents the PCI devices from being unplugged. I couldn't actually find a name for the part, so if you guys know it, do let me know in the comments. I will just screw this at this position here. Now, if you guys haven't already caught me, I had actually removed the two expansion slots before making this video, so I cannot show you the process. Well, you just basically need to break the required expansion slot cover and you are done. Most cases nowadays comes with screws for easy removal. Now this is the PCI X16 Gen 4 slot where the GPU will be installed, and this lock needs to be in an open position while installing the GPU. Now let's bring in the GPU. These are the two 8-pin connectors. First, I will have to remove the protection coverings from the display ports and the HDMI ports as well. While installing the GPU, I'll first start aligning the GPU PCI connector with the slot on the motherboard, as well as the backplate of the GPU with the removed expansion slots on the case. With the GPU aligned, gently press it to plug it in the motherboard's PCI slot. The GPU lock should engage with a click as the GPU gets plugged in. But it is not done yet. We still need to screw the GPU with the case to hold it in its place. First, I will lower this no-name thingy and screw the GPU to the case. And we are done with the GPU installation. This case has a PSU shroud at the bottom where I will be installing my PSU. Let's get these wires out of the way first. Well, I think I would like to have my PSU fan facing downwards. There are vents at the bottom of the PSU shroud that will allow air from the PSU to pass through. Also, this case has plenty of room underneath it, so I can have the fan facing downwards without any issue. There are also guide rails to keep the PSU in position. This is how it looks once it's inside. There's the little GamerStorm logo peeking out. Alright, let's screw the PSU in position. Now let's connect all the power connectors. This is the fan hub that I was talking about earlier. This will be powered by a SATA power connector which we have installed in our PSU. But first, I will get the motherboard, CPU and GPU power connectors at the front side of the case because that's where these connections will be done. The CPU connector to the top and the GPU connectors to the bottom part. Now let's plug the fan hub SATA port with the SATA power cable of the PSU. This hub does not actually allow speed control of the fans and they spin at full speed all the time. Of course, at this price, that's not much of a big deal. There you go. This hub is the only connection required to be done at the back of the case. Now let's move towards the other side of the case. Well, it looks like it will be a bit more convenient if I lay the case down horizontally while connecting the remaining connections. First, the 24-pin motherboard power connector. Just pull the small lever on the connector and plug it in. Now for the CPU connector at the top left. Remember, this board has 8 plus 4 pin for CPU power. So one of the 8 pin connectors will be connected to 4 pin port on the motherboard. The CPU connector is in place. For the 8 pin GPU power cable, it comes in a 6+2 format, and they need to be pressed together and inserted at the same time to the GPU power port. Like this. I'll repeat the same with the second cable. There, it's done. Now let's connect the case wirings with the motherboard. First, the front panel audio header. The connector pins will usually be at the bottom left corner of the motherboard. That's the audio plugged in. Now this is the USB 3 connector, which actually connects two USB Type A ports on the front panel of the case. Let me see if I can show you the connector pins at the motherboard end of things. It is hiding behind those GPU power cables. Now you can view it properly once it is plugged in. Now for a number of front panel connectors like the power switch, reset switch, speaker, system status indicator, LED switches, etc. All this gets connected to the F panel set of pins on the motherboard. In a lot of cases, these come as a separate connectors, and each needs to be plugged into the F panel pins individually. But thankfully, in this case, the F panel connectors are bundled as a single connector, and only that needs to be plugged in. There you go. With this, most of the connections are complete. Now let's tidy up the backside cables a little bit. Let's tuck it in there. I'm really not a pro when it comes to cable management. Well, I think that's enough cable management for now. Let's install the back panel. Tighten both the screws. Now let's take a final look inside the case to check if everything is in place before finally installing the glass side panel. Looks like everything is in order. Okay, let's bring in the tempered glass side panel. Screw it tight. Peel the plastic. Now remember to install the HDMI cable from a monitor to the HDMI port of the GPU and not the motherboards. Plug in the power connector. Oh, I almost forgot about the antennas. But while we're at it, there is one more thing I would like to show you. This is the dust filter at the top of the case. This has got magnets all around to keep it in place. Some say that this maybe obstructs the airflow. I will leave it on at the moment. My area can be quite dusty sometimes. These are the Wi-Fi antennas that comes with the motherboard. This needs to be screwed into the antenna ports located on the motherboard's I/O shield. So this is the final build. Okay, let's switch this thing on. Now if you are wondering, this monitor is a 24-inch 1080p monitor from MSI, which I've been using with my laptop. I will be getting a 1440p monitor later this year. Alright, it's revelation time. Okay, all the fans are spinning and looks like all the RGBs are lit as well. The memory should already be trained from my open air testing earlier. Okay, we've got a display. We're in the BIOS. And it looks like all the components are listed accurately. So, that's a successful build. Now this build cost me 1,32,270 rupees. I will leave links of all the components used in this build in the description down below. How do you like the looks of this build? And I would also like to know your opinion on the total cost of this build and what components you would have chosen at this budget. Do let me know down in the comments below. So that's it, I guess. Thanks to you all for joining me in my PC building journey. Hope to see you all in my future videos. Have a great day.